Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first presentation of the 53rd AFRAA Annual General Assembly, which is on COVID-19 impact on African aviation and the imperatives for recovery. The presentation will be made by Mr. Patrick Bodis, who is the Vice President, Marketing, Advisory Market Insights from MHIRJ Advisory Services, also known as Mitsubishi for those who are familiar with the aircraft manufacturers. And Patrick, you have the floor for the next 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to start and kickstarting this General Assembly with a presentation on the impact of COVID-19, more in details from what we've seen before, just a presentation before, and also looking at the elements for the recovery. So if you want to start the presentation, please click the first slide. Yeah. So I think we need to start looking at the position of Africa and Middle East in this crisis versus the rest of the world. And what we see here is that Africa has been doing relatively well, actually, compared to the rest of the world. It has been a very significant crisis. This crisis has been deep, it has been global, and it has been long. But when we see what Africa has done, it was a sharp drop for sure in 2020, but then the recovery has been very steady and very smooth from that point for the region again, and much better certainly than other regions, particularly Europe and Asia, for instance. If you click next, we'll look into the various regions, and as we can see here, within Africa, not everyone has been seen the impact of the crisis the same way. If you click, we see that Western Africa has been almost recovering at the level that we had before. Can you click, please? Yeah, so they very much nearing the pre-pandemic levels, whereas the Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, and Southern Africa follow more or less the global trends. And if you click next, you'll see that Central Africa, it's still close to the 2020 bottom. So not every region has I've seen the same level of impact, and this is important when we talk about the continent. If you click next, please. And we took a couple of examples here with Southern Africa and Northern Africa, because even in the drop here, the results and the effect have not been the same. If you take South Africa, you see the share of domestic has been the major driver in the reduction of number of seats deployed in that sub-part of the continent. Whereas in Northern Africa, it's been the opposite. Actually, the domestic intra-regional traffic remained more or less stable, but a big sharp drop in international traffic. So depending on the networks and how airlines were structured, and what happened also during the pandemic, because you need to remember that in Southern Africa, some bankruptcies took place as well there, affecting a lot the traffic in the regions. But every network, every airlines have had different effects and had to react differently to the crisis. Click next, please. And if you look at country levels now, we've seen different kind of recovery shapes. If you look at Nigeria, and we picked examples here just to illustrate the fact that, again, every country sometimes has a very different profile than others beyond the regions. Nigeria, almost at the beginning of 2020 levels, and certainly back to a growth rate, which is really noticeable and interesting. So very dynamic V-shaped kind of recovery. In Egypt, it's more like a U-shape, getting back to those levels that we had early 2020 before the pandemic, but more like in a long U shapes. Algeria, because of the different COVID impact there, it's more kind of a W shape where it's going up and down at the moment. And Cape Verde, like we see here, still very much in an L-shaped kind of recovery, with not much improvement since the 2020 start of 2020 levels. Next, please. So what are the bad news, and where we think there will be a network restart to be had in the coming months and years? Some 300 routes have been cut during the pandemic. That represents about 1/4 of the normal routes compared to 2019. That's a lot of routes that have been cut, mainly international routes for obvious reasons, lockdowns and country closure. But if you click the next, there's a bit of hope, because there are some 90 new routes that have been launched during the pandemic. And that's remarkable, because these 90 new routes will probably accumulate with the 300 routes that have been cut, which will reopen. I mean, these routes that we've seen stopped and cut during the pandemic will reopen. There are economic ties for most of them, but they will be reinforced by the 90 routes. And if you click again, you'll see that during the pandemic, more frequencies have been added to the routes, the top 100 routes in Africa. 44% of those routes have had higher frequencies in 2021 than in 2019. Again, very good message, because for connectivity, this is a great message. Of course, it's due to the fact that airlines have had to redeploy capacity, probably more regionally and locally. Yet we believe it's a good message, because moving forward, the passengers will be accustomed more to those frequencies, and that will drive a boost in traffic moving forward. Next slide, please. So one other element which participated in what we've just seen is this trend. We've seen a trend over the last 10 years of increased regional presence and regional aircraft in the region. And we still believe that we need to get more to solidify the basis of the airlines in Africa. But we've seen more in a year. So from January 2020 to November 2021, we've seen more traffic increase in the regional aircraft space and the fleet there in service than we've seen over the last 10 years. And that's good news, because again, like I said, this will help airlines to increase their penetration and arrange a better feed for the longer haul flights. Next, please. One of the elements where airlines in Africa have been, I think, doing and managing the fleets extremely well, it's the number of airplanes in storage. When you look at the picture of Africa versus the rest of the world, you can clearly see that, yes, there was a peak of airplanes going in storage during the crisis. You would expect so, but much less than the rest of the world and in other regions. 20% at the peak in 2020, we're back to 18 and probably further down by the end of the year. So it means that airlines, African carriers, have demonstrated a great level of flexibility in their fleet management. Again, redeploying those airplanes into regional routes and trying to keep the airplane and the fleets flying, which is the most important, of course, for an airline, and to keep some revenue stream there. Next slide, please. Another element which I think has helped airlines worldwide, but in particular in Africa as well. It's the boost of cargo traffic. The capacity in Africa grew by 33% since 2019. The cargo load factors improved by 9% from the pre-pandemic levels, and most of the fleet, if not all the fleet, is still in service. And some airlines, like elsewhere in the world, have been very creative to cope with that additional demand and recoup a bit of some of the losses made by the lack of traffic, passenger traffic, by converting passenger airplanes into cargo airplanes. As we can see here, Ethiopian was part of those airlines trying to adopt this and converting passenger airplanes into freighters, which we were dubbed freighters in the industry, filling the holes and putting packages on top of seats with spatial arrangements, again, to cope with the additional demand that the world has seen, generally speaking. We see this trend for sure, probably seasonal, or at least during the pandemic. It will get back to some norms, but I think some people have started to see the benefits also of carrying cargo by air as opposed to use ships and other modes of transportation. And we should see some remaining elements of that trend after the crisis, for sure. Next, please. So having looked at the global picture here, what we see coming up, as challenges. First, we still see that for airlines, there's a lack of harmonized vaccination requirements between the countries. And that's not just in Africa, by the way, it's worldwide. Every country is adopting different measures to let people in. And that's creating very much a chaos in the industry for people to travel. It is still seen as a high barrier for getting back to the pre-COVID situation and a more fluid traffic. There will still be requirements from vaccination standpoint, for traveling moving forward, like we've seen for safety and security after 9/11. So some of this will remain, but we're looking for more harmonization down that front. Like it was said before in the previous segment, I think there's still a need for government financial support as necessary. Again, it's a case-by-case basis, but we are not out of the crisis. Airlines are still suffering. And we've seen the different pictures from country to country. If it continues like that in certain countries without financial support, we should see more damages made to airlines, and that's damaging directly the economies of the concerned countries. So government needs to pay special attention to the financials and help and support airlines locally as necessary. We still see also, and that's the time to do it right now, unclear strategic plans. We start to see the beginning of a recovery after, I would say, a year and a half of destruction of traffic and disturbance on the networks and the fleet. It's time to rethink the plans from an airline standpoint, and sometimes at country level, to start on the right foot, fit and best equipped. So that's the unique opportunity that we see. As usual, you can see the glass half empty or half full. We tend to see the glass half full. There's a lot of opportunities that will come up in the next few months and couple of years. Airlines need to reshape their networks, and they need to focus on new unexploited regional routes, again, to continue strengthening their footprint on the continent. They need to rethink the fleets to offer right-sized modules, which will be in line with the future market requirement. One of the things that the world has learned is that bigger is not necessarily better. So there's a size for every market, and airlines needs to start thinking about how to adapt the fleet to those new requirements. And schedules as well. I mean, we've seen airlines in Africa doing a good job in terms of market stimulation by redeploying the fleet on regional routes and domestic routes. I think this is great because it will stimulate the market and will further contribute to increase passenger demand. So like the theme of this General Assembly, I think it's time to restart and restart fresh. Next, please. So the key takeaways for us, number one, local and regional first. Home should remain your territory as an airline and your guarantee for growth. It's important that people and airline there start to think market penetration and feed before stretching too far and too thin. Profitability should drive the schedule and the routes decisions. Second point, fleet planning and revenue management teams can no longer work in isolation. Why we're saying so is you know, the fleet planning team in an airline usually thinks long-term. You know, they define the fleet and this is defined for the next 10, 15, 20 years sometimes. Revenue management, sometimes a much shorter time frame to optimize the revenue given the asset. But that creates issues in the sense that sometimes you end up with capacities not adapted to the market requirements in terms of revenue. And what we've seen in this crisis definitely is that the cost per seat mantra that was there before may no longer be the right metric moving forward to define fleet requirements. It's more the profit per passenger that has to be considered. A seat is not paying, as we know. A seat is just a seat. It's the passenger that's sitting in that seat that will pay. And it's how much you're going to get, how much contribution you're going to get from that passenger by adapting the size of the airplane and not trying to discount too much because the plane's too big and you've got to fill it. So these kind of considerations needs to take place now for the restart. And number three, if you want to click, please. Number three, you need to make sure as an airline that your core business is well understood, is very clear, and you know what makes you unique. There's a differentiation that needs to take place. Some airlines are doing extremely well in Africa about this, but we believe that the market will change moving forward. The business models are evolving. There's more market segmentation. Airlines need to pay a lot of attention to their core business, what defines them, and what will define them given the passenger needs in the next few years. So if you want to click next, just to finish on that, we are, like was said, we are the Mitsubishi advisory team. Can you click next, please? And we're ready to help. We have a coverage worldwide. We know very well Africa. Most of you in the audience must know Jean-Paul Boutibou, who's our Vice President for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We've got the background from an OEM. We are an OEM, but also we know airlines, we know lessors, and where we're very good at, it's really those network, fleet, and schedule optimization for airlines. That's where airlines call up on us and help us. So we're ready to help because we believe that there's still a very good positioning of Africa moving forward. We've seen a very good resilience of the region during the crisis. It's time to reset and to rethink the future for the next few years, while the traffic is recovery, and be ready for the time when we will be out of this crisis in full boost and full reset of the traffic. Thank you very much. And I hand over the mic now to for the rest of the General Assembly to Maureen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for sharing with us Mitsubishi perspective on the impact of COVID-19 on the African air transport industry, and your own perspective of what are the success factors for us to get back on track and become resilient for the African airlines. Looking at the floor, we do not have any questions arising from your presentation, and we'll now be moving on to the next very exciting session, which is the CEO's Roundtable. And we have lined up 4 CEOs from different regions across the continent who will discuss the theme, Time for Takeoff, Building Africa's Resilient Travel Ecosystem. So we're going to hear from each of these CEOs, their personal experience, what are their ideas and what are the plans that they have, and what is their call to stakeholders on specific actions that need to be taken for us to get back to a resilient travel ecosystem. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let us meet at the other session, which is the CEO's Roundtable. Please go back to your attendee hub and click on the CEO's Roundtable, and look forward to seeing you there. Bye-bye.